My name's Lori Friedman, just to introduce myself. And I work on the phone banking team and the writing team, but I also head the electoral team, and that's a group that we meet and we decide where to work and how to work this year, and put together a lot of the programs that we're going to be talking about tonight. So next slide, please. Our agenda tonight is pretty straightforward. We'll start with just covering the Democratic landscape, our strengths and challenges going into November 5th. We'll talk about final updates for the Senate races, the House races, the White House. We'll cover some early vote data that we have now, cover election night, what to expect, election night and for the weeks afterwards. And then we'll close by having our voter outreach teams talk about how to get involved in these last critical few weeks before the election. And then we'll end with a Q&A. Next slide, please. All right, for the landscape, this is obviously a turnout election at all levels of the ballot. We're looking at essentially tied races. So it's going to come down to which party turns out the most amount of voters. But we have a real strength for doing that. First of all, we're leading in fundraising at every level of the ballot, from candidates to parties to party committees to PACs. We have outraised and early outraised Republicans across the board. That's allowed us to build out strong field operations, hire more staff, reserve more ads, and simply be much better prepared for these last critical weeks. In fact, I just read that the Harris campaign has raised, all told, $1.6 billion this year for this election. That is a record. But more equally importantly, we have a huge lead in the grassroots and the number of volunteers in organizations like this, people meeting together like this, finding out how to help and what they can do to bring Democratic victories this fall. We have a lead in organizing structures, coordination between parties and candidates and grassroots. We simply lead across the board that way. But one thing that isn't talked about enough, I think, is the fact that we're post-pandemic. We are going to have an additional advantage this year compared to previous elections in that we are out in the real world again. We are canvassing, we are holding rallies, we are a visible, much more visible presence in people's communities as they go around their daily lives. And that is going to give us a bounce over previous elections. Even without that, in general, Democrats simply vote more in presidential elections than they do in midterms, and that's going to help us, especially in our House races. We have a lead in voter enthusiasm across the board. Every poll I've seen shows us as a much more enthusiastic party, some places more than others, but I haven't seen a single poll that shows the Republicans are more enthusiastic. And we answer poll questions when we're being asked which candidate to vote for, but that doesn't translate to actual voting. What actually translates into voting is the enthusiasm that parties have about their candidates. And when we look at the early voting data in a little while, I think you'll see why that is proving to be true. Voter registration is a little bit more complicated. After 2020, Republicans did out-register people compared to Democrats. That's not surprising because they were the minority party and had lost and were probably a little more motivated to register than we would. We did see a bounce after the Dobbs decision, and we saw a huge bounce this summer after Harris became the presidential ticket. It hasn't been enough to overcome a lot of the advantages that Republicans had built up, but it certainly has made a huge dent. I think the place that we're probably most concerned about it is in Pennsylvania, where they were really able to close that gap between Democrats and Republicans. But we have to remember that late voters vote more, and all of these voters that are late to the voter rolls are going to be highly motivated to vote. They also may not be showing up in polls yet because when pollsters go to get lists of voters, those take a long time to get updated. So it's possible that we're still not seeing the full effect of a lot of the late registration that we've had this year. We certainly do have some challenges, though. The first one is misinformation, and we all live in sort of a bubble of misinformation, or our own sort of little bubbles, but the bubble for misinformation for Republicans is a really tough one to break. It's a tough one to crack, and we haven't quite figured out how to do it. I think we've gotten better on social media and better than we've been before, but it's still a pretty closed chamber for them. One of the things that works well is simply grabbing major headlines. And when you change your candidate in the summertime, that grabbed a lot of headlines, and she's been such a dynamic force, and the party has been so energized that has broken through a little bit. At least it's forced Democrats into the headlines. But one of the other issues that she's facing, that is one of her big challenges, is that most of the time, a lot of the softer voters, the voters that aren't super enthusiastic about voting, they tend to not pay much attention until the fall. And the fall is when we normally have three presidential debates. Only having one is definitely hurt her. And she would have been happy to have more, but obviously it didn't go very well for the Trump side. So they refused. But be that as it may, she had one. It was great. She clearly won. But the issue that comes up most with her is not that people don't like her or don't approve of her policies, but they're just not familiar with her. So she's done a great job over the last couple of months, 3 or 4 events a day in these 7 battleground states. But that is her biggest challenge right now. And we can help her with that. That's why she's so dependent on the grassroots, on volunteers this year. We need to be her voice. We need to reach sort of a record number of voters in a fairly short period of time. And the last thing that will affect a turnout race is the get out the vote effort at the end. Like I said, the voters that are left at the last week and a half or so are those ones that are sort of on the rim, sort of on the edges. And the side with a strong get out the vote effort is probably going to prevail. Next slide, please. So let's start with the Senate. This is an electoral map of the 50 states. We will be at 50-50 in November. Right now we have 51, but we're going to lose West Virginia because of Joe Manchin. So that'll put us at 50-50. About a third of the Senate seats are up for re-election every 2 years. So 34 this year. 7 of them are considered highly competitive. We've just added an 8th in Texas. But the challenge for us is that we have to hold all these seats. We don't have that Pennsylvania John Fetterman seat that we can pick up this year. So the pressure is on us to defend the seats that we have, to keep it 50-50. And then, of course, win the presidency, though the vice president will break the ties. Next slide, please. So the road to the Senate is said to be red, because in order to do that, we do need to win in red states. It's definitely doable. We have a lot of advantages going in, but it is a challenge. When you look at ratings, the way they rate the presidential race and House races and Senate races, they rate them by toss-ups to leans to likelies. And a toss-up race is a race that is likely to be decided by less than 3 points. And anything can change the direction, the trajectory of that race to the other side. So a strong get out the vote effort, more money, a stronger candidate, a scandal. Those kinds of things can move the needle enough to change control of that particular seat. Once you get into the races that are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points, it becomes very difficult to do that. You can move it, you can make it more close, but it's very difficult to actually change control of that seat. And so that's what we call those lean Democratic races, those races that are sort of over that 4-point margin. And there's 3 that the rating groups across the country agree are more secure for us. Now, we still have to work there. You have to raise the money, you have to have strong campaigns, but if everything goes well, it's really difficult for the other side to generate enough change to take control. And that would be Arizona with Ruben Gallego, Nevada with Senator Jackie Rosen, and Pennsylvania with Senator Bob Casey. As you can see on the polling, these are the average polls for the last couple of weeks. They are in a pretty safe territory right now. For Michigan and Wisconsin, there's a bit of a discussion among the groups. Some groups think this is a toss-up. Some groups still feel these are races that lean Democrat. Michigan is an open seat. That makes it a little less secure. There's no incumbency advantage there, but we have a great candidate in Alyssa Slotkin. She's a member of the House, longtime elected official in Michigan. And then Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, that's closer because Wisconsin, nobody wins a race in Wisconsin by more than 1 or 2 points, no matter how long you've been there. Ron Johnson won it by just 1 point a couple of years ago. So it's a 50-50 state, and but she's a very strong candidate and likely will prevail. She's run a very strong campaign, but you can see the polling there is lower and sort of just at that margin of error. The true toss-up is Ohio. This is a red state. We know Sherrod Brown is fantastic. He has been there since the 70s, winning as a Democrat. He has enormous amount of support from manufacturing and unions and the working class. And even though those people are often Republican, they do continue to support him decade after decade. He's sort of the definition of an incumbent advantage. He's raised enormous amounts of money. He has a huge, huge campaign machine going, has done a great job. But you can see that polling at advantage is fairly low. Most people feel he's going to be able to pull this out. It will be very narrow, but we've been working for him all year. This is a great place to put your energy going into Election Day. So if we win these 6 races, we will be at 49. And that means we need to win 1 race in a red state in order to get to 50-50 and take over and maintain our control of the Senate. It's definitely doable. Montana is the best chance that we have because we have a strong incumbent there who's been winning like Brown for decades in a red state. But Montana's a lot redder than Ohio. He needs to get a lot more crossover support, and demographics have changed in Montana. They don't favor us as much as they used to. He's running a great campaign. The polling has been mostly biased polling for Republicans. We haven't seen good polling there. Inside political people feel that he's definitely right in there, and this could go either way. But we have some other opportunities too. Texas was recently moved from a likely Republican to a lean Republican based on close polling, sort of in that 3 to 4 point range. Colin Allred's a great candidate, but it's Ted Cruz, and that's a hard hill to climb in Texas. 2 other possibilities. These are likely Republicans. I know people are curious about them. Florida. Debbie Murkessel-Powell is sort of really outside the margin of error with her polling, but she's run a great campaign in a very complicated state of Florida. Dan Osborne is a new sort of a surprise candidate that's come onto the scene. Nebraska has actually 2 Senate races this year, but he's running against an incumbent. He's a union leader of many years, fairly well known in the Omaha area. He is running as an independent. Democrats purposely did not run a candidate in Nebraska, realizing that he has the potential to do exactly what he's doing, which is to make this very, very close. He will caucus with Democrats most likely should he win, and he would be that 50th seat that we need. But I think that's where the challenge in the Senate lies, is that all of the voters in these 4 red states, they know that if they cross over, if they're a Republican and they cross over for a Democrat, they're not only changing their senator, but they're changing the entire makeup of the Senate. They're flipping the Senate Democrat. And I think that's going to be a challenge for a lot of Republicans to make that vote. But we'll see. Those are where what we're focused on, with Montana being the leading most possible possibility for that 7th seat. Next slide, please. For the state of the House, the map looks a little bit different. It's a little bit deceiving. We're only 4 seats short in the House, but there's so many large rural districts in the middle of the country that it makes the House map look a lot redder than it is. Most of our seats are in the coastal areas. They're very tiny and small, densely populated. But you can see the kind of those gray, yellowish areas. Those are all of the districts that are up for play on the House side. The math is we need to be 218 to take control. We have 214 now. We just need to net 4 new seats. That's very doable for any party in any election. The House sort of mirrors the popular vote. So how the popular vote is trending in the country tends to support the direction of the House. And that's why, because Kamala is leading the popular vote, we have a presidential election on our ballot, that the energy is a little more positive for Democrats on the House level. We have 28 opportunities that we need to work in, 28 competitive toss-up districts that will decide control. That doesn't seem like very much out of 435, but it's actually more than we were anticipating. So that's good. We were thinking we'd be down in the low 20s instead of the 28. As far as the position of the House, I like to call it the line in the sand, and I'm borrowing that from Rudy Salas, who's one of our congressional candidates we're working for, who talked about this when he came to talk to our phone bank a few months ago. But basically what he meant is that if Kamala wins and she's the president, she needs to have a chamber to get anything done. She has to have either the Senate or the House, or she'll be relatively powerless, especially with the Supreme Court being fairly Republican leaning. If she loses, having the House is the only thing that really stands between us and Republican Project 2025. So it's absolutely essential that we win the House, that we gain it back, and it is doable. It is right in our hands. Another reason that we need to have the House, is that we want Hakeem Jeffries to be in charge of the electoral vote count on January 6th. We want him to be in charge of security. We want him to be in charge of the procedures. We simply want him to be in charge, period. When we look at voter outreach, though, and how to work in the House, it's pretty obvious with the Senate. It's pretty easy to go on Mobilize. The senators are emailing you every 5 minutes about opportunities and fundraising. The House is a little bit different. The presidential race and the Senate races grab volunteers emotionally and easily from across the country. Very high profile. They're on the news. We know the names. Not so much with our congressional candidates. If you live in an area that has a potential of these 28 House races, it's really only you and the people around you that are going to vote there. It's really unlikely that we're going to be able to pull in enough volunteers from across the country to work in a small congressional race. And so for that reason, we are encouraging people to volunteer in the next few weeks in a congressional race if it's close to them. Next slide, please. So where are these races? I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but just to give you a little bit of an idea of the energy that's going on right now with the House. On the left-hand side is the holds. These are House races that we currently are the incumbent, and we need to defend them. There's 13 of them. We're very secure in these seats, even though they are toss-ups. We won them by about 4 points, an average of 4 points a couple of years ago. And remember, we're going to get a little bit of a bounce this year, so be a little stronger. The T or the B after the actual district is whether Biden or Trump won this in 2020. And you can see Biden won most of them. The numbers in the parentheses are just polling. And I hesitated to even put this in because polling in the House is notoriously terrible. But I just wanted to put it in to show you how the polls of the House are almost entirely favoring Democrats this time. On the right-hand side, this is what the Republicans have to do. They have to defend a lot more. They have to defend seats that Biden won, almost all of them 4 years ago, and in places where they are behind in almost every single poll. So you can see the energy right now is really with us on the House. It does tend to, we say it goes through California and New York because we have about a third of the total seats are in those 2 states alone, but every single one of these states is important, and they can all be that seat that wins us control. We are leading in fundraising at the House level. Even our challengers in California have outraised their Republican incumbents, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do in an expensive state like California. The generic vote is a poll that is asked of people across the country, would you rather see Republicans or Democrats in charge of Congress? And you can see that this is also about 2 points. That's about where Kamala is. It just shows you the mood of the nation is moving Democrat. But just to reiterate, that voter outreach is critical. Your hour or 2 hours of volunteerism makes a huge difference. We don't have to talk to as many voters in a congressional district as we do for the Senate or the presidency. Your time can make a huge impact. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how you can do that. All right, next slide. Moving on to the presidency. This is the electoral map for the Electoral College. Looks pretty red and pretty blue. There's just the same 7 states that we always talk about every 4 years that decide the presidency. And we need 270 to win. And for Democrats, we need 44. With Republicans, they need a few more. The states are often divided into 2 groups, that Rust Belt in the Northeast, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. We call that the blue wall because between those 3 states, they do have 44 votes, and that will win us the presidency. Over time, over the last 25 years or so, this is an area that has been won by Democrats more than Republicans. The only one to really lose it was Hillary Clinton in 2016, but by very, very, very small margins. So this is an area that we tend to have a little bit of strength. It was Joe Biden's strength for sure. When he was running, one of the reasons that Obama picked him was his ability to win this area. The Republicans have traditionally done a little bit better in the Sunbelt states of North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, though Nevada has moved much more blue and has been won by Democrats in the last 25 years. One of the things that's exciting for us is we've seen Kamala make some really strong inroads and into North Carolina. And that's certainly a state that is definitely in play for us this year. Their governor race that is going very strongly towards Democrats is helping her. We need to remember that Arizona and Georgia are red states. They've only been won once in the last 25 years, and that was by Biden a couple of years ago. We don't need to win them to win as long as we get that blue wall. So her strategy is a little bit more open than Biden's. She's been campaigning in all 7 states, but clearly the most obvious path for us is through the blue wall. But equally strong if she can pick up North Carolina and Nevada. That would be great. And Ruben Gallego says she is, if he can win by 7 points, he said she will win Arizona again too. But again, all of these are toss-ups. The polling is all within a point. Most of them are either him up or her up by half a point to a point or so. That is well within the margin of error. That is sort of a meaningless number. These are tied, and it will be the margin of effort in the next couple of weeks that will win this for us. Next slide, please. This is the state of the race as far as the popular vote goes. This is a polling average, so it weights too much, I think, Republican biased polls. If you look just at the really strong polls, she's up by more like 3 to 4 points, but this just shows you the trajectory of what she's done in a really short period of time. At the very far left, that's the day that Biden stepped aside and how quickly she was able to re-energize the party and bring Democrats back on board. Next slide, please. I'm not going to talk a huge amount about the polls because, like I said, they are all essentially tied, but there are some concepts and some things that have been thrown around out lately that I'd like to cover. And one is this concept of red wave polling and what does that really mean? And so in 2020, the Republicans vastly overperformed. We might remember we were going into that election in November feeling pretty comfortable and yet had to wait until Saturday until they called states like Georgia and Nevada and Pennsylvania. And Republicans just simply overperformed those polls. So since then, pollsters have made adjustments in their methodology to weight the Republican vote a little bit more heavily to try to make sure that we're not missing out on Republican votes. That's not a bad thing. That is good polling, and it's done in various ways with various polls. That's different from what we're calling red wave polling, which is polls that are intentionally designed to give Republicans an advantage, to make Trump look stronger or Republican candidates look stronger. And they're doing that for 2 reasons. One, we hope, is that the polls are actually much more favorable and they know it, and they're trying to create the illusion this election is closer. It probably is close, but they want to make sure that it stays that way, because if a voter thinks that a candidate is out of reach, they're not very likely to vote. They're much more likely to stay home. So they want to make sure that the perception is that this is a very, very close election, which it likely is. But their other reason is that if they are going to challenge the results of a free and fair election, which they likely will, they want evidence. They want to be able to say, hey, I'm leading by 3 to 4 points in all of these polls. How could I possibly have lost? So there certainly is sort of a more nefarious goal that they have in mind. It's likely that if we go by what's happened over the last few years since 2020, that we are in a stronger position because we have overperformed almost every single poll in almost every single election since 2020. They've had a very hard time capturing that progressive vote, capturing the female vote, and we have continued to do, as we know, well in special elections, down ballot elections, Virginia, Wisconsin, places like that, ever since 2020. So every reason to be optimistic as we go in, but it's those last few voters that we need to capture in the next few weeks to make sure that it happens. Want to talk a little bit about who's voting for her and who we really need to talk to in the next couple of weeks. It's very clear, just no matter what poll you're looking at, that she has a clear lead among college-educated people, youth, Black, Hispanic, and independent voters. His lead is among non-college educated and white voters. But what is dramatically different and making the difference in this election is the gender gap. She's leading more among women than any candidate has in the history of American politics. He's leading among men, but not nearly at the level that she is. So this is where she's pulling ahead, is among this tremendous movement of women to support her. So this is what people are calling it, it's the gender election. Women will win this election for us. We are the more enthusiastic party. That's also coming out in different kinds of polls. All across the spectrum, we are more enthusiastic. That's going to translate into votes on election day. And as we are seeing actually right now in early voting, especially among young people, young youth are far more enthusiastic right now than their Republican counterparts. One last item to talk about as far as polls go, and especially about early voting, is this idea of crossover voting. The Harris campaign has said that they feel that they're going to get 7% of the Republican vote in the battleground states. That will be enough, certainly, to win in a close election, but it's not going to show up until election day. It's not going to show up in this early voting. So just to keep that in mind, there's a lot of hidden vote in the early vote right now that we're not seeing. Next slide, please. So what is early voting showing right now? It is early voting. It takes a while for states to load their data into the portal that we use to look at early voting. But it's encouraging what we're seeing so far. What we want to do is compare it to 2020 and 2022. We know that in 2020, we had a record-setting turnout. If we can beat that, that's encouraging. We know that we want to see and need to see for our House races, Democratic turnout beating 2022. That's going to give us the House. Is that happening yet? Well, yes and no. But let's look at who's voting right now, because I think that's really interesting. Across the board, women are voting in higher numbers than they did in 2020 and 2022, and that's not surprising. That is, again, an evidence of that enthusiasm among women and the support that Kamala has gotten. Men are voting in lower numbers in general than they have before. Again, that's very encouraging because that is a Trump base. Another thing that's really interesting is the age. The bulk of people that have voted so far over the age of 65, over 60 to 65. And that's a bit different than we've seen in the past. And that is sort of the baby boomers have moved now entirely into that age group. This is a high voting block. And again, it shows that the difference now in their voting patterns, and now they've sort of moved into a different age group. What we're also looking at is the youth vote. Youth do not vote early, and they are late voters. I know my kids think that if they vote the day before the election, that that's early voting, no matter how many times I tell them that you might as well have waited until election day. So youth votes late, and that is a big part of our vote, so that when we look at early voting, right, we're not seeing that yet. And that's a very encouraging sign because we're doing pretty well right where we are. The other thing we're seeing that's different, that I think has a big potential for those of us that follow election night and the days after closely, is the vote method and the accessibility of voting, especially when we compare it to 2020. 2020 voting was pretty easy. Even the reddest states made voting easy. It was during the pandemic and there were public health concerns. Some states have made it much harder. Some states have made that the same, have kept a lot of that new open voting. It really depends on the state. But there does seem to be a shift going on in how parties vote. And it used to be that we sort of trusted that Democrats would lead in early voting and Republicans would come in on election day and, make up this huge amount of ground. And could they catch up was sort of the big question that we would follow. But there's a lot of evidence right now that that's not happening. And part of that is carryover from the pandemic, where people realized that it was a lot easier to vote early or to vote by mail. And part of that is that the Republican Party has clued in that this is actually a good thing, that the early vote brings people off the voter list. It makes it easier to contact and work with those voters that are less likely to vote. Early voting helps everybody. And they are sending that message out in many parts of the country. Not everybody's listening, but some are. Trump has sort of sent mixed messages about that. But what we are seeing is that although Democrats are voting in great numbers, so are Republicans voting early. That doesn't mean that they're also going to come in and have an advantage on election day. Likely what's going to happen is we're still going to lead in the early vote, but by much less than before, and Republicans will lead in election day voting, but not nearly like they used to be. This is one of those things we'll have to wait and see after the election, and it may differ from state to state, but we're definitely seeing a shift. And if you look at California, we're about 8 years out now from universal mail-in balloting, and we're seeing 85% even of Republicans are voting by mail here in California. So it's kind of a question of when and not if people will move to more early voting. As far as looking at the individual states and how we're doing, just want to put a little word in about California because I know a lot of us are working there. We're a little bit behind. That's not surprising. California is a lazy voting state. We're not where we want to be right now. And so we're going to be really working hard in the next couple of weeks to make sure that we get these voters to the polls, turning in their ballots, and getting those numbers up a little bit. It's not terrible, but we definitely have some work to do on the phones in the next few weeks in California. As far as the battleground states go for the presidency, which is what we're very focused on, they look great. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, which is the Rust Belt, that blue wall that we need to win. We are over voting our 2020 and 2022 numbers. Democrats are, and Republicans are not. They are lower than what they've been in those past couple of elections, which is a sign of two things. Number one, we have a better get out the vote effort going on in those states. And number two, we're the more enthusiastic party. They may come in and vote on election day, but likely that's not going to be enough to catch up if the numbers continue the way they are. So it's still early, but off to a great start in those battleground states. Again, due to a lot of the voter outreach that we've been doing, talking to voters on the phones and getting them to turn that ballot in. In Arizona, North Carolina, and Georgia, we're seeing about the same. Republicans and Democrats are voting at about the same level or above 2020 and 2022, which again is good for us. We are going to get that bounce eventually. So the fact that we're voting in high numbers is a great thing. Nevada, the numbers, the data is not quite in yet. There's not enough of it to be, to really know what's going on there. Have to give it a little more time. Next slide, please. Before we end, I just wanted to cover a couple of things about the election and the timeline itself. Remind everybody, because I know people are very concerned about Republicans interfering with the electoral count and a lot of the things that happened in 2020. This is a bill that was passed in 2022. It's bipartisan, and it is a very complicated bill, but it changes the way the Electoral College is managed after the election. The main thing that it does is it takes the role of state legislatures completely out of the picture. So all of those state legislatures that tried to interfere and replace slates of electors and all of that, it doesn't happen. It's put everything in all the certification process in the hands of a single state elected official, usually the governor or a secretary of state, all of whom are friendly and supportive to us this year in battlegrounds. It makes the role of the vice president purely ceremonial, no more loopholes that Trump tried to maneuver around. It expedites all court challenges, so things have to be done in a much more timely fashion and also with a great deal more evidence. They're already starting. They've already filed cases across the country for an election that has not even been completed yet in an attempt to get around some of the timing challenges, but they don't have any evidence yet, so hasn't gone very far anywhere. Another thing that this bill does is it makes it so that a single congressional member cannot challenge the results. It has to be 20% now of the House and the Senate in order to challenge, so it makes it a lot more difficult. And it also makes it a lot more streamlined for states to certify. It's a complicated process, but it's made it a lot more streamlined. And as far as the calendar goes, after the 5th is election day. They have about a month, a little more than a month, for the states to double check their results, do recounts, process late ballots, provisional ballots. All of that gives them anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the state. But by the 17th, all the state electors must have met, voted, and certified. All these certifications will have to go to the Senate archivist by Christmas, and to be waiting for that congressional vote count on January 6th again. This year it's on the 6th. Again, we really want to see Hakeem Jeffries be in charge of that day, and then Inauguration Day is on the 20th. Next slide. All right, my final words are just about election night and what to expect, because I know people are curious about that. It's going to look very similar than 2020. Nobody's really made major changes in how they count ballots. And the major determinant is how states prepare those mail-in ballots. Some places like California open them, check them, count them, put them into the machines. All they have to do is push the tabulation button when polls close and they get a total. And that's why California can call their statewide elections oftentimes within 15 or 20 minutes. Other states that work that way, Arizona, Michigan, North Carolina. So you'll see mail-in ballots and early ballots that may be Democratic heavy this year still come in for us there. On election day, you're still going to see states like Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin be a little bit more GOP heavy because they don't process their ballots ahead of time and it's easier for them to count their election day ballots quickly and then work on their mail-in after that. So I think we're going to see a similar pattern that we saw in 2020. We will be waiting probably 3 or 4 days before everything gets called if things are close. So I hope that I've made it sort of clear how close this is, but what great shape we are. What we need to do before then and during the next few weeks is to get trained and get more volunteers working in these areas. We're not there yet. The campaign has done an extraordinary job. Building platforms, building out voter outreach, and including us and talking about it and asking us and making volunteers a part of her campaign. And that is filtered down all the way to our House races where our candidates say they are feeling that same enthusiasm on the ground. So I'm going to turn this over, but just one last word. I want to put out a special thank you to Joy Martin, who's here tonight. Our postcarding program has closed. We're closing it tonight. The final deadlines are tomorrow. So all of you that wrote postcards, thank you. They're going to be hitting our voters, going out in the mail in the next couple of days and hopefully having that great effect. But postcards make the biggest effect when they're combined with a phone call and a text. So really encourage you. I know it's frustrating as a postcarder myself to not have much to do the final couple weeks. So we make opportunities available for you to join our phone banks, our texting and canvassing, and continue to make your impacts felt in this election. So I'm going to turn this over to Betty, and I'll be back to answer questions later on in the hour.
Okay, thanks, Lori. So I'm going to talk just for a couple of minutes about phone banking. It is a great way to capitalize on that voter enthusiasm advantage that Lori was talking about. Right now, as you can imagine, we are calling for Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, and then we are also calling for Rudy Salas, who is running for Congress in one of those flip districts, California's 22nd congressional district in our Central Valley. We welcome people of all experience levels at our phone banks because we have an incredible team of mentors who provide small group training. You would come to the phone bank, indicate your level of experience, and we'll put you in a breakout room with a mentor and other people of a similar experience level so that your training is targeted. You can call on your computer, a laptop, or a tablet. We discourage calling from your phone just because it's more difficult to train you and more difficult to make the calls on such a small screen. Our dialer is Scale to Win, and it's an excellent dialer. It's pretty intuitive, and we can send follow-up texts through the dialer. Our phone banker privacy is protected because the voter will only see a local number. They will not see your number. Even when you send those texts, it will not come through with your own phone number. With about 15 minutes to go, we have a debrief, and those are a great gathering of all the phone bankers where we can share out about some interesting calls, but also people ask questions and others share tips about something that worked for them. And then along the way, it has built just a great sense of community. And every single week, we have new people in the community who are brand new to phone banking. So don't be shy if you've never done it before. We really do need you. Right now, we have 3 regular phone banks left before we begin our GOTV phone banks. One is tomorrow. One is coming up, tomorrow from 4 to 6 p.m. Pacific time. One is Saturday from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. And the other will be next Tuesday. That will be our final regular phone bank. These are crucial if you want to call for those last 5 days when we're getting out the vote, because we want to train you now. During those last 5 days, it's truly all hands on deck, and our mentors are going to be making calls as well. So come now if you have even the slightest inclination, and just dig deep into a braver sense of yourself. Come see what it's like, get a little practice, and we'll get you ready so that you can join us for those final 5 days. Okay, next slide, please. So the final sprint, and Betsy, if you want to just click on all these, I'll just read through it. As I said, these final 5 days, November 1st through the 5th, that's Friday through Tuesday, we are going to be holding special phone banks. We will have 4 hours of phone banking every one of those days in 2 2-hour sessions. The wonderful thing about those phone banks is that we will have the cleanest, leanest lists that we've had, because we have spent months weeding out wrong numbers, people who have moved, people who aren't supporters, and we will be calling the people who are supporting Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, Rudy Salas, and getting them out to the polls if they have not yet voted. In these calls, we'll be providing really important voting information, talking about where polling sites are located, what are the hours of their polling location, or even still early voting hours. And we will also provide them with information about drop boxes and answer any other questions they have about candidates. As I said, there won't be any training provided on those last 5 days. So please come either this Tuesday, tomorrow, this Saturday, or next Tuesday, and we'll get you trained so that you can join us for those final 5 days. You have to be experienced on those days with Scale to Win and with Zoom to make those calls. But we are really looking forward to being together as a community and pushing both Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, and Rudy Salas over the top. We all believe we will, and we just have to turn out our voters. So join us. We're really looking forward to having you. And I'll pass it on to texting with Julie.
Hi. Texting has been really robust and useful this campaign season, at times joyful. It's been a great tool to reach voters and supporters, and there's some research that suggests that up to 90% of texts are read, even if they're not responded to. You're able to reach in a single session hundreds of texters, and you can have exchanges with dozens of them in that amount of time. And it gives people really concrete, actionable information, which is one of the reasons why it's most effective now during get out the vote efforts. In a text, we are providing people with very specific information about when early voting starts, what hours their polling places open, whether they need a photo ID, and whether or not they need to sign an envelope. It's very specific and customized to their personal ballot, and it's really helpful to make sure that all of those ballots, all of those inclined people who are going to vote, actually get their ballots in and counted. It also provides people with links that they can check on so that they can immediately take action if they need to find out more information, or if they have any problems, there's a number to call as well. And in addition to get out the vote efforts, texting campaigns are used to recruit volunteers. I would say about half of the campaigns are used to get people to sign up to volunteer, either to get on a bus and go to a swing state, or to get on a phone bank or some other event or rally that they have. It's also used for voter identification to make sure that we know who is supporters, so that when we do have campaigns that are get out the vote and ballot chase, that we know which ballots we want to make sure we're chasing. There's very little room on texting for persuasion. The scripts are very tight, and while you're having personal exchanges with people, there's not really any, there's very little opportunity for persuasion. So if that's something you're uncomfortable with, then texting should not be a problem for you. And if it's something you want, then texting might not be a good fit for you. Next slide. Okay, so IndiMarin does not administer any of the text banks, unlike phone banks, but we can help you get plugged into the campaigns that are going on. And we actually have a spreadsheet that we've put together where all of the campaigns have been vetted, and we provide you with information on how to get signed up and trained for each of the campaigns. And when you sign up through our website for texting, then we'll give you access to the Slack channel, and that spreadsheet will be available to you. On that spreadsheet includes a number of different campaigns, and we'll be updating that throughout the next few weeks. Some of them are nationwide campaigns like Newsom's Campaign for Democracy. You may know that Governor Newsom is not running for anything this year, but he has a very extensive campaign to help elect Democrats across the country up and down the ballot. The DNC has nationwide texting, and NextGen, an organization that focuses on young voters, is also very active with nationwide texting. There's also a number of state parties in the swing states that have text banks. And there's an organization called Californians for Choice that is focused on California and has texting to the 5 key congressional races. So if you're more interested in doing something closer to home, that's a good option for you as well. So I will tell you that most of the campaigns will say that phone banking is their top priority. So if you've never done anything before and you're looking for something to take up, phone banking might be the way to go. But if you're really interested in texting, we have a lot of texting that we can help you get plugged into. And if you're already texting, we can help you prioritize to make sure that your efforts are getting the most impact.
Thank you so much, Julie. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Morgan. I'm the founder. I'm going to quickly touch on canvassing, then wrap up the meeting and try to carve out a little bit of time for Q&A. So as you probably know and have heard, canvassing is widely considered the most impactful tactic. However, it's not geographically feasible for everyone. But if you live near or within driving distance of a toss-up House race or in a Senate battleground, it is the best use of your time over the next 2 weeks. And we'll get to all the links that you need to check and see if there's any, toss-up races close to you that you can get involved. The reason that this is considered most impactful is because face-to-face interactions with voters is the best way to move the needle to increase turnout, and this is a turnout election, and training is provided. I loved what Betty said a little while ago about digging deep and summoning our inner courage. Whether it's phone banking or canvassing, we can do this, right? So if you're nervous, but you live near a toss-up race, we really encourage you to get involved. If you don't live near a toss-up race, phone banking and texting are the next most impactful options at this point. Next slide, please. So canvassing near you is something that you will be able to find on our Canvass Voters webpage. And in a moment, I'm going to show you an image of our website, so it'll be easy for you to navigate to find all of the links, all of the pages you need. We really do need you guys at this late stage. You can go to the next slide, Betsy, thanks. To fish for yourselves, right? We are working very, very hard to run all these programs. So the more that you can be self-sufficient and find things on the website, which is really very user-friendly, it is great. So the heart of our website, which is indivisibleMarin.org, is the Take Action section. And here there's a screenshot. It shows all of the tactics we've been talking about tonight: phone voters, canvass voters, text voters, write voters, which is wrapping up. So all you need to do after this meeting is go to indivisibleMarin.org, drop down to the webpage, read it, click on the links. You should be good to go. If you get stuck, email us at info@indivisibleMarin.org. We will help, but we want all of you to be taking action ASAP every day, every hour counts at this point. Next slide, please. So in addition to the volunteering, and by the way, we're also going to send you a follow-up email with a recording of this meeting, the slides, and all of the links. Again, we want to make it as accessible to all of you as possible to get going on your own ASAP. But here are some additional things that we're going to ask all of you to do in addition to volunteering that are so important in these last 2 weeks. Vote early. Voting early has a lot of strategic benefits to our party. And we have a web page that goes into all those details. And we are asking you to encourage your friends and family to vote as early as possible. On our Vote Early webpage, we have a template email you can send to those kids of yours who maybe like to send their ballot in at the last moment, or any friends. You can send a template email to everyone you know, encouraging them to vote early and explaining the reasons why that will help Dems win. Here's a personal favorite of mine. Don't spend your time watching the news. It's just toxic. You know, it just gets us all anxious. So personally, I'm in a news boycott. I've got my head down every day. I'm looking at how I can best spend my time on voter outreach. Encourage all of you to do that. And lastly, it's up to us to be positive role models for other Democrats. There is so much anxiety, and it's understandable. This race is effectively tied. But we don't want to fuel the anxiety. We want to fuel voter enthusiasm and voter turnout. And the best way we can do that is be the voice of reason, be the realistic optimist in saying that, yes, Dems can win if we do the work. There are more of us than there are of them. We need to do the work. And that's the message each and every one of us needs to be giving to our friends on social media. In any context you're having with people, fuel enthusiasm, fuel optimism, but realism that the work is needed. We need to keep it up right up until the last vote is cast on November 5th. So thank you all for all you're doing. I know many of you here have been working relentlessly all year, and we so appreciate that. If you're new to us and new to this effort, thank you for joining in, and we will do everything we can to make you as impactful as possible in the final stretch. And just one last thing, and I know we're getting toward the end here, but IndiMarin is not going anywhere after the election. We work year after year. Since we were founded in 2018, we work in off-election years doing advocacy work. And we will work in the post-election season to keep you all posted if there are additional follow-up actions needed. There might be things like ballot curing or, various post-election actions where volunteers will be needed. We will keep you all posted. We can't be specific now because we don't have a crystal ball. It will all depend on the outcome, but you can rely on us to keep you informed and engaged and being productive. So thank you for your efforts, and we hope you'll stay involved with us. At this point, we'll take some questions, answers. I know there's not much time, but what we will do for those of you who have some time to stay on a little longer is we will extend the Q&A past the top of the hour. If you want to sign off, feel free. But if you have questions, we'll try to get to all of the questions that we have, even if it runs a bit over. And a lot of those questions, I'm sure, will go to Lori. So with that, I'm going to click over to my cheat sheet of some of the questions from the chat. And I'm going to direct these mainly to you, Lori. So a question is whether Republicans that are voting for Kamala are they mainly still registered as Republicans?
Yes, yes, those are Republicans that may vote Republican on the rest of their ballot, but would vote for her.
Right. And somebody who's clearly calling on their own, which is amazing, and we appreciate it. The question is, when there are not enough callers to make the dialer work efficiently, can we find other groups that are calling for Rudy Salas in 22?
Yeah, sometimes we do have issues with the call. We need about 8 to 10 people. So if you're in our phone bank, it does sometimes start out slow, but I encourage you to hang in there, because as more people start phoning in the morning, it will work. If you call on your own, I would definitely recommend calling in the evenings and on Saturday and Sunday afternoons, because there are multiple phone banks for Rudy or for all the congressional candidates during the week. And so if you happen to call on a time when they're running, then you're going to have more support. But it does tend to be a little bit slower than the Harris dialer, but just stick with it. It speeds up.
Great. A question about how we gauge the mail-in ballots. This person lives in Washington, where all the voting is by mail, and just wondering how we kind of keep track of what's coming in.
Yeah, there's a great site. It's called Target Smart, and it's an amazing site, and they just track the early vote across the country. You can break it down by state, by year, by gender, by all kinds of different demographics, and it's just a way that we have to track it and analyze it, but it is slow. It's not in real time, so it takes them a couple of days. Some states are really slow to report those and make them publicly available, but it is the sort of the brain of the early vote world, and that's where we get our data from. So it comes directly from the elections departments in all of the states.
And this is kind of a follow-on question I have, Lori, which is, are all the states, do we know the early vote based on party, or are some states hard to gauge which party?
That's a great question. It is by party. Many of the states, especially some of the battlegrounds, do not register by political party. But statisticians and people at Target Smart or other groups have statistical modeling that they use to create a very, very accurate number that's been supported in past elections of an estimation of how many of those votes are Republican and Democrat, and they've been spot on. So I trust them. Okay,
excellent. A question regarding the Waltz effect. Is he following Harris's approval lines or getting new supporters, teacher unions, etc.?
It's a great question. Historically, vice presidents have very little effect on an election, historically. So that's probably the case this year, but I can tell you that her approval ratings are pretty high, certainly higher than Trump's. His approval ratings are even higher than hers. Not a lot, but they're always a few points higher. I think they joke about it a little bit. So he could only help. He's not hurting anything, but whether he's brought in a specific state or a specific demographic or group, there's no evidence to show that he alone can do that. We won't know that till after the election, but people like him the most out of all 4 of the candidates and vice presidents. He's the most popular.
Well, we like to hear that.
Yeah.
And the final question is, I mean, essentially, do you care to comment on anything related to Elon Musk?
That's a bit over my pay grade. I'm speechless with a lot of the things that they're doing. So it certainly feeds into the fear that millionaires are going to be running the government if he wins. I think that's probably the most obvious thing about doing that.
Okay, well, I think that's the end of the questions. Well, here's one. How are the recent TV blitzes being received by voters?
Yeah, it's really hard. Living in California, we just don't get what it's like to live in one of those battleground areas. If you guys are living in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or any of those states, it must be overwhelming. I mean, we spend trillions of dollars on it, so it's got to be effective. The only thing that I've seen that's actual data is that the candidate ads themselves, the ones that say, you know, I'm Kamala Harris and I approve this message, have the most power. Those dark ads, as much money is being spent on them, they don't affect voters in research as much as a candidate ad does. So that's why our ads that are more candidate driven are usually a bit more effective, but we certainly see a lot of them. It's part of the political world that we live in. I'm just glad I don't live in one of those areas.
Can I interrupt for a
let's
second?
see. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I've seen a lot of great comments about canvassing, and I am the canvassing lead right now. And I just want, if you go to the Canvas page, there are a tremendous number of options, including even phone banking in swing states. So the person from Texas may want to go there and check Texas to see if maybe there's phone banks right there locally for them, but there's canvassing opportunities. And someone said, is it better to go to Las Vegas or Adam Gray and Modesto? And I said, if you're new, you probably want to do Modesto because we know the group running it. But I would say go to the canvassing page and then see what the options are. And you can always contact us. It's on the front of, on our main webpage, it says contact us and ask any questions you want, and I will get back in touch with you. Okay. So, but thank you for your enthusiasm.
Yes, Betsy, thank you for mentioning that. It's a little hard to keep track of all the comments in the chat, but just please know that all of us on the steering committee of Indivisible Marin consider it our top priority in the next couple of weeks to be responsive to each and every volunteer. So we want nothing more than to help you connect with the most impactful way to volunteer over the next 14 days. So please look first on our website if you would. And if you get stuck at all, we answer every email, and we'll make sure that it gets to the particular program lead for a quick response. And that's either at info@indivisibleMarin.org or, as Betsy said, on the Contact Us button on our website. And just in closing, want to thank everyone. You know, just keep bringing it. We need to leave it all on the field. Sleep when we're dead, as Tim Waltz said. We have got to just do nothing pretty much else for those of us who are able. I know there's a lot of retirees in our group. And for those of us that have, you know, jobs and kids and all that, whatever you can do, every hour you can carve out matters. So let's stay in touch and keep it coming, everyone. Lori, do you have any closing remarks? And let me just say, shout out to Lori Friedman.
Oh, yeah.
Is she remarkable? I mean, we're just so lucky to have Lori and her wisdom every month. And she'll give us another presentation post-election. But Lori, do you have any comments to close?
Just thank everybody for coming, you know, all these months. A lot of you have been here every single month. And even if this is your first one, thank you. That's why we do this. We really want to bring information to members that is concise and relatively unemotional and straightforward. You know, every reason to be really hopeful. I'm very hopeful. This election, the discussion, and I don't think anybody's asked, this is the first time I've done a call like this where someone hasn't said, why is this election so close? So I appreciate that people, you know, that's, I don't know. And that's something for a later day. But what I do know is that we have the ability to win this. We have better tools. We have more volunteers. We are more motivated. I don't know why it's so close, but I know it's a winnable race for us across the board. We just have to do the work. So thank you all for coming, for signing up. I'm looking at my phone and I'm seeing all of the signups that are coming in right now for phone banking. And that's exciting. I will see you maybe all tomorrow at our phone bank at 4 o'clock. Get everybody trained and ready to go. And thank you really for the team that's here tonight, all of you that are here from IndiMarin. And I see so many of you guys and so many familiar faces, but Dan is here and Nanda is here, people that have just worked, you know, around the clock for months to be at this moment. So I just really thank them. They could not ask for a better group of people to spend most of the past year with than the people on this screen. So we are going to be here until November 6th, working hard. So join us. We have a great time. Hang in there.
November 6th
We
and
can do
beyond.
this. Yeah. November 6th, we'll take a break, but we can do this. We can do this. We just need to power up for the next couple of weeks. Good night, everybody.